Hey guys, and welcome to this week's at-home lab. For this experiment, we'll be making hard-boiled eggs and learning the chemistry behind it. Let's get started.
Before we begin the experiment, it is important to understand a little bit more about the structure of an egg. The outermost layer of an egg is the shell. The shell is almost entirely made up of calcium carbonate crystals and has as many as 17,000 tiny pores. It's a semi-permeable membrane, meaning that air and moisture can pass through the pores. It also has a thin outermost coating called the cuticle that helps keep out bacteria and dust. Next, between the shell and the egg white are the inner and outer membranes, which are transparent protein membranes that prevent against bacterial invasion. These are pretty tough layers as they're made partly of keratin, a protein found in human hair. Between the outer and inner membranes at the egg's larger end is the air cell. The air cell is an airspace that forms when the contents of the egg cool and contract after the egg is laid. The air cell grows. As an egg gets older, the air cell grows larger. Next is the albumin. The albumin is the egg white. The egg white is made up of 4 alternating layers of thick and thin albumin containing approximately 40 different proteins in addition to water. Next is the chalazae. The chalazae are opaque ropes of egg white that hold the yolk to the center of the egg. They attach the yolk's casing to the membrane lining the eggshell. The more prominent they are, the fresher the egg is. Next is the vitelline membrane. This is the clear casing that encloses the yolk. And finally, the most inner layer of the egg is the yolk. The yolk contains less water and more protein than the egg white. It also contains some fat and most of the vitamins and minerals of the egg. The yolk also is a source of lecithin, which is an effective emulsifier and can be used in experiments such as making hollandaise sauce. Now that we understand the structure of an egg, let's look at the properties of a raw egg. One of the main components of an egg is protein. The egg white is about 12% protein and the egg yolk is about 16% protein. Because of this, any alteration to the structure of these proteins will significantly change the structure of the entire egg. All proteins are made up of amino acids. When an egg is raw, the proteins are in their normal state. This means that the amino acids are folded in a very specific way that gives the protein its shape, and that shape, among other things, gives the protein different properties. One large determinant of the native state is how it interacts with water. Parts of the protein are hydrophilic, meaning they like water, while other parts are hydrophobic, meaning they avoid water. The hydrophilic parts will be found on the outside of the molecule interacting with water, whereas the hydrophobic parts will be hidden on the inside of the protein. This is how the protein keeps its shape until the eggs begin boiling. So what exactly happens when you hard boil an egg? Well, importantly, when you apply heat to the egg, denaturation occurs. This is the process by which the chains of amino acids are changed from their original state. Heat denatures the protein by disrupting some of the bonds that hold the molecule into shape. When hard boiling an egg, the proteins clump together and solidify, causing both the egg white and yolk to harden. What happens to the shell during this process? This will be discussed in slightly more detail later. However, one problem associated with cooking hard-boiled eggs is that their shells tend to crack, which means some of the egg white can leak out. So, to prevent this, often people add salt or vinegar. Salts and acids denature proteins in the same way that heat does. And adding these speeds up the process by which the egg solidifies and stops the seepage. Another reaction will often occur between the iron ions in the yolk and the hydrogen sulfide gas in the egg white. When heat is applied, the two can combine to make a green-gray ferrous sulfide and hydrogen sulfide gas. This results in a greenish-gray colored yolk that comes from the reaction of the iron in the egg yolk and sulfur in the egg white. To avoid getting this green yolk, cook your eggs just long enough to reach the desired doneness, but no more, and quickly plunge the cooked eggs into cold water to stop the cooking process and minimize the iron-sulfur reaction. However, if you do end up with a greenish yolk, don't worry, the eggs are still safe to eat. Now that we've learned a bit more about the science between hard-boiling an egg, let's consider the conditions we would like to hard-boil our eggs under. First, should we add salt to the water? Adding salt to boiling water makes it harder for the water molecules to escape and enter the gas phase. Thus, salt water has a higher boiling point. This means that the eggs can be cooked in higher temperatures. However, higher temperatures may also produce a more rubbery texture. However, as we learned earlier, salt helps the proteins in an egg coagulate, meaning that they become more firm, and thus it will aid in the fixing of the egg if it does crack. The next decision is whether to add baking soda. Baking soda adds alkalinity to the water, making the shells hard and easier to remove after boiling. It's better to use baking soda if you're boiling fresh eggs, as the shells are not as tough and harder to remove after boiling. However, this may not be as necessary for older eggs. This is because fresh eggs have a lower pH than older eggs. When an egg is first laid, it has a pH around 7.6, but as it ages, it loses carbon dioxide. After just a few days, the pH may reach a pH around 9.7. The egg cooks from the outside to the inside, and its proteins become denatured. The denatured proteins are more likely to stick to the membranes on an eggshell of a fresh egg because it's more acidic. Thus, we can either use baking soda if we're using fresh eggs, or just choose to use older eggs. Our next decision is whether we're going to prick the egg or not. Pricking the egg is making a small hole in the shell at the large end of the egg, where the airspace is located. When hard-boiling an egg, the air in that space heats up and escapes through the pores of the shell after the egg white sets, leaving a flattened end. However, if we prick the egg, the air is able to escape. There's a lot of debate around the exact benefits of pricking an egg. Some say that pricking an egg allows the water to leak between the shell and the internal membrane, allowing the shell to be peeled off easier, while others say that allowing the gas to escape will make the egg less likely to crack, which could be good for those cooking with older eggs, which have a larger air sac. However, others say that poking a hole weakens the shell and makes cracking more likely. Ultimately, this does not seem like a significant decision in the hard-boiling of an egg. And our last decision is when to add the egg. Should the egg be added before the water is boiling or after? This is an important decision because it will affect how the egg white is cooked. If you drop an egg in boiling water, it heats up very quickly. If the heat is kept up too high or on for too long, the proteins in the egg white will form more and more bonds, resulting in water being squeezed out of the protein network, giving a rubbery texture to the egg. It also means it's more likely to crack because the air in the egg has had less time to escape because it's rapidly heating. If you add the eggs prior to boiling the water, the eggs can cook slower and the egg whites are less likely to become rubbery. However, this allows for less control over timing and it takes longer. Now for the experimental design. I've decided to add salt to the water so that the water can reach a higher temperature to speed up the cooking time slightly, but also as a measure to protect the egg against cracking. I've decided not to use baking soda as I'm not using fresh eggs. I've also decided not to prick the egg. This is because if the egg cracks, I already have a method in place to help seal the egg back up, the salt in the water. I've also decided to add the eggs before the water is boiling, another measure to protect against cracking. I've decided to do this because I usually boil the water first, and I'm curious about this method. This will hopefully prevent the egg from becoming rubbery and cracking, but I will have to be extra diligent about the cooking time. So let's check out this experiment. To begin the experiment, we're going to start with our 2 eggs, put them in this pot. We're going to add enough water to cover about 2 inches above the egg. Place it on the stovetop, and I've decided to add a little bit of salt to allow the water to reach a higher boiling point to cook the egg faster and help in case the egg cracks. We're going to turn on the heat to about high to medium heat and let it boil. I decided to add the eggs before the water was boiling to try and prevent from a rubbery texture of the hard-boiled eggs. We've been cooking the eggs for about 15 to 17 minutes now, and I'm pretty sure they're done. So we're going to turn off the heat and quickly take each egg and put it immediately into a cold water bath. This is going to stop the cooking and prevent it from being overcooked. And we're going to let it sit there for about 15 minutes. The eggs have been in the ice bath now for just over 15 minutes, so let's see how they turned out. To figure it out, we're going to have to crack the egg and peel off the shell. And this is the peeled egg. Honestly, it definitely looks less rubbery than when I put the egg in after the water's boiling. So I think putting it in before definitely made a difference. I think that's something I'll stick to in the future. Let's see how it tastes. Very good. You can see that the yolk, it's like a perfect yellow color, perfectly cooked. Overall, this experiment was very successful. I ended up with 2 delicious hard-boiled eggs. However, there were a couple of potential errors. First, the egg could have been cooked too long. This is because I added the eggs before the water was boiling, and thus I forfeited control of timing. Another source of error could have been the age of the eggs. The eggs were relatively old and thus could have led to a greenish-grayish yolk. However, this did not take away from the quality of the egg.
Well, I hope you learned a little bit about hard boiling an egg and the chemistry behind it.